There is a particular kind of courage required to celebrate when you have just experienced profound loss, to gather together and to create joy and music and light in the wake of devastation and grief, to choose to move forward with festivals and celebrations when you would be fully justified in remaining in mourning indefinitely, when the reasonable and natural response to tragedy might be to close yourself off from joy and to retreat into private grief and isolation. This is the story of communities throughout human history who have faced this moment of decision, the moment when enough time has passed that people begin to wonder if it is appropriate, or even if it is necessary, to resume the celebrations and festivals that had characterized their lives before sorrow. Came the moment when community leaders and townspeople must decide whether to hold the first festival after a period of crisis or tragedy, whether to ring the bells again and light the candles and invite people into the streets and into the town squares to dance and sing and celebrate, whether to embrace music and laughter and gathering when doing so might feel like a betrayal of those who have died or those who continue to suffer. It is a story about the delicate and difficult balance between honoring the dead and continuing to honor the living, about finding the right moment and the right way to grieve without allowing that grief to consume and destroy the future, about how communities heal through ritual and through the reclamation of joy, even in the face of continued loss, about how the first festival after sorrow becomes a moment of profound meaning and significance, a moment that marks a turning point in how a community understands itself and its future, a moment that says to the world and to themselves that they will endure, that they will continue, that they will create beauty and celebration despite everything that has happened, that they will not allow tragedy to erase their capacity for joy and their commitment, community, and connection. Before we continue, if you'd like to join me for more stories like this, feel free to subscribe. I share a new one every day. And if you don't mind, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. To understand the significance and the deep meaning of the first festival after sorrow, to truly comprehend why these moments matter so much and carry such weight in community memory and in community identity, we must first understand what festivals mean to communities and why they are important to human life and human culture in ways that go far beyond entertainment or mere amusement or distraction. Festivals are among the oldest and most universal forms of human cultural expression and human social practice. For thousands of years, stretching back into prehistory, across virtually every human culture and civilization that has ever existed on this planet, festivals have played central and organizing roles in community life. Festivals mark the turning of seasons and celebrate the transitions between different parts of the year, the movement from spring to summer, to autumn, to winter, and back again. They celebrate harvests and give thanks for the abundance that sustains human life, allowing communities to gather together and to acknowledge their dependence on natural processes and on forces beyond their control. They commemorate historical events that are significant to communities and that communities want to remember and pass down to future generations, creating continuity between past and present and future. They celebrate religious beliefs and spiritual practices that are central to how people understand the world and their place in it, creating spaces where the spiritual and the material intersect. Festivals provide opportunities for community members to gather together, to reaffirm their connections to one another, to create a sense of shared identity and shared purpose that transcends individual differences and individual concerns. Festivals are moments when ordinary time is suspended, when the normal rules and structures of everyday life are temporarily set aside, when communities gather together in public spaces and engage in activities that are different from their everyday activities. During festivals, people often wear special clothing that they would not wear in their ordinary lives, eat special foods that are prepared only for festivals or only on special occasions, participate in rituals or parades or performances that are unique to the festival, and engage in forms of play and celebration that would be unusual or even inappropriate in everyday contexts. Festivals serve multiple and overlapping functions in communities and in human life more broadly. They provide opportunities for people from different social positions and different backgrounds and different economic circumstances to gather together and to create a sense of community identity and solidarity that crosses the normal boundaries that divide people from one another in ordinary life. During festivals, the social hierarchy of everyday life is often temporarily inverted or suspended, allowing people who are normally separated by class or status to interact and to celebrate together. They mark the passage of time and the turning of seasons, helping people to maintain a sense of connection to natural cycles and to the broader rhythms of life on Earth, helping people to remember that human beings are part of nature and that our lives are embedded within natural processes and natural patterns. They commemorate important historical or religious events, helping people to remember and to honor what came before them, helping communities to transmit knowledge and values and stories and identity to younger generations, ensuring that the past is not forgotten, but is actively remembered and honored. They provide breaks from the ordinary patterns of work and routine that characterize most of human life, allowing people to rest and to enjoy themselves and to experience moments of joy and celebration that provide contrast and relief to the difficulties and challenges of ordinary existence. For many people, the break that festivals provide from ordinary work and routine is essential for mental health and for maintaining a sense of meaning and purpose in life. They often involve music and dance and other forms of artistic and creative expression, allowing people to create beauty and to engage in forms of creativity that express something essential about human nature and about human capacity for meaning-making and for the creation of beauty and for the expression of emotion through non-verbal forms. Beyond these practical and social functions, festivals also serve important psychological and emotional functions for individuals and for communities as wholes. Participating in festivals creates experiences of transcendence and connection that can be deeply meaningful and deeply moving, experiences that seem to touch something essential in the human spirit. For people who have experienced trauma or loss or hardship, who carry grief or sadness or pain within them, festivals can provide moments of relief and of respite and of hope, moments when it is possible to forget about pain and suffering and to experience joy and connection and to feel part of something larger than oneself. Festivals create memories that last long after the festival itself has ended, memories that people can recall and relish and that help them to endure difficult times, memories that become part of their personal histories and their identities. For communities that have experienced tragedy or disaster, or loss for communities that have been marked by death or devastation or crisis, the first festival after the period of sorrow becomes particularly significant and particularly meaningful in ways that ordinary festivals, however joyful and meaningful, cannot fully replicate or capture. The first festival after sorrow becomes a moment that the community will remember forever, a moment that will be discussed and reflected upon for years and decades to come, a moment that will be mentioned in the community as official histories and in the stories that families tell about what happened during a particular time in the community's life. Throughout human history and across many different cultures and civilizations and societies, communities have faced the decision of when to resume festivals after periods of sorrow and after major disruptions to normal community life. Some of the most significant and most poignant instances of this phenomenon have occurred in the aftermath of wars, epidemics, famines, natural disasters, and other large-scale catastrophes that have disrupted normal community life profoundly and that have caused massive loss of life and massive suffering. When a community has lost many members to disease or to warfare, when the community is in mourning and grieving, when every day life has been disrupted dramatically, and the structures of community life have been shattered or severely damaged, when the normal world seems to have ended and the future seems uncertain and perhaps impossible, the question of when and how to resume celebration becomes urgent and significant and carries tremendous weight and significance. The decision about when to hold the first festival after sorrow is not a decision made lightly. It is a decision that the community must think about carefully, must discuss thoroughly, must approach with seriousness and respect. Consider, for example, the cities of Europe at the end of World War II in May 1945, a moment that represents one of the most significant instances of communities facing this decision. For 6 long years, from 1939 to 1945, Europe had experienced constant and devastating warfare, sustained bombing campaigns that destroyed cities and killed civilians, military occupation by foreign armies, the Holocaust, and the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other people deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime, starvation and deprivation and unspeakable suffering that affected every person and every family in profound ways. Millions of people had been killed in warfare and in genocide. Cities had been bombed and destroyed, reduced to rubble and ashes, transformed from centers of human civilization into wastelands of destruction. Societies had been torn apart, their structures and institutions destroyed or corrupted. The normal structures and rhythms of life had been disrupted and seemingly destroyed. People had gone hungry for years. Families had been separated, with men conscripted into armies and women and children left to fend for themselves, often struggling to find food and to survive. The Holocaust had industrialized the killing of human beings on an unprecedented scale. The future had seemed hopeless and uncertain and dark. When the war finally ended in May 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, and when fighting in Europe ceased, when the horror seemed finally to have ended, many cities began to organize celebrations. These were the first major celebrations in years. In some cities, the first celebrations since before the war began, or even the first celebrations since the early years of the war, before the worst horrors had become clear. They took on tremendous significance as communities marked the end of the war and the beginning of peace and the possibility of recovery and rebuilding. In some cities, these celebrations were joyous and exuberant, expressions of relief and hope and gratitude for survival and for the restoration of peace and for the end of the killing and the bombing. They were moments of catharsis when people could finally allow themselves to experience the relief and the joy that had been suppressed by years of fear and suffering. People danced in the streets. People embraced strangers. People wept with relief and with joy. But these celebrations were also bittersweet and complicated and deeply layered with emotion, because they occurred in the context of profound loss and continued grief for those who had died or who remained missing, for loved ones who would never return, for sons and brothers and fathers who had been killed in warfare or who remained imprisoned in camps, for the cities and the institutions and the ways of life that had been destroyed, for the cultural treasures that had been lost or destroyed. Similarly, consider the cities and towns that experienced devastating earthquakes or tsunamis or other natural disasters that have killed hundreds or thousands of people suddenly and have destroyed homes and infrastructure and the basic structures of community life in devastating ways. After such a disaster, after the initial period of emergency response and rescue and recovery, efforts after the shock has begun to fade somewhat, and after people have begun to process what has happened, communities face the question of when to resume normal life and when to resume celebrations and festivals. Some communities choose to resume festivals relatively quickly, seeing them as part of the process of recovery and rebuilding, seeing celebration as a way of affirming that the community will not be destroyed by the disaster and that life will continue. Other communities choose to wait longer before resuming celebrations, viewing premature celebration as disrespectful to the dead or as inappropriate in the context of ongoing grief and suffering and ongoing reconstruction efforts. In some cases, communities have decided to wait a year or more before resuming their major festivals, giving themselves time to grieve and to reconstruct basic infrastructure before attempting to celebrate. In more recent times, We have seen this phenomenon play out in communities throughout the world that have experienced terrorist attacks, mass shootings, epidemics, and other modern disasters. After the September 11th terrorist attacks in 2001, major cities throughout the world gradually began to resume festivals and celebrations in the months and years following the attacks. The first major celebrations after the attacks became profoundly significant moments. These first festivals after the attacks took on layers of meaning as communities marked the beginning of recovery and the commitment to continuing life despite the trauma of what had occurred. In New York City particularly, which had been the site of the attacks, the first major celebrations and festivals after September 11th became opportunities for the city to express resilience and to demonstrate to the world and to themselves that the city would not be defeated or destroyed by terrorism, that despite the enormous loss of life and despite the destruction of the Twin Towers, the city would continue to celebrate and to create meaning and to be a vibrant center of human culture and commerce and creativity. When the New York Marathon was held in the fall of 2001, just weeks after the attacks, it became a powerful symbol of the city's recovery and resilience. When the first major holiday season arrived after the attacks, with holiday celebrations and holiday shopping and holiday gatherings, it carried profound meaning for the city. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as vaccination rates increased and as lockdowns began to ease and as people began to gather again in public spaces after months or even a year or more of isolation and lockdown, the first festivals and large public gatherings after the pandemic lockdowns took on special significance and special meaning. For many people, gathering again in large groups felt momentous and meaningful in ways that it had not before the pandemic. The simple act of attending a public festival or a gathering or a concert seemed to carry new meaning and new weight and new value. For people who had been isolated for months or even for over a year, who had been separated from friends and family and community, the first festivals after lockdown represented a return to normal human connection and to human community after a period of profound disruption and isolation. People wept at concerts. People expressed gratitude for the opportunity to be in large groups again. The first major music festivals and outdoor gatherings after COVID lockdowns became meaningful because they represented a return to something that people had taken for granted before the pandemic but had lost during lockdown. The decision of when to hold the first festival after sorrow is a delicate and complex decision that communities must make carefully, with much deliberation and discussion and careful consideration of different perspectives. There is profound tension between the impulse to mourn and the impulse to celebrate, between honoring the dead through continuing grief and allowing oneself to experience joy, between honoring the dead by pausing all celebration and honoring the dead by continuing to live and to create beauty and meaning. Different people will have different perspectives on this question, and these differences reflect different values and different ways of understanding how communities should respond to loss. Some people feel that celebrating too soon after tragedy is disrespectful to those who have died and is inappropriate and even offensive in the context of ongoing grief and continuing suffering. These people feel that the community should remain in a state of mourning for an extended period, that to resume celebrations too quickly seems to trivialize the loss and to suggest that the community does not value the lives of those who were lost. These people might point out that while it is appropriate for individuals who did not lose loved ones to begin to celebrate, it might be inappropriate for the community as a whole to celebrate when survivors are still grieving deeply. Other people feel that celebration and the reclamation of joy and the affirmation of life are essential parts of the healing process, and that denying communities the opportunity to celebrate and to experience joy would be a way of allowing tragedy to destroy not just loves, but also the capacity to experience happiness and meaning and to maintain hope for the future. These people might argue that those who have died would not want the community to remain in mourning indefinitely, that they would want the community to continue to live and to experience joy. The first festival after sorrow becomes a moment of profound meaning, partly because it represents a deliberate choice and a deliberate decision. Communities do not have to celebrate. In the aftermath of tragedy, communities could choose to remain in mourning indefinitely. They could close their gathering places and cancel their festivals and retreat into private grief. But most communities make the choice at some point to eventually resume celebrations, and in making that choice, they are making a statement about their future and about their commitment to continuing to live despite the losses they have experienced. The choice to hold the first festival after sorrow is a choice that says, we have experienced tragedy and loss, and we grieve for those who have died, and we will never forget what happened, but we choose to continue living, we choose to continue creating beauty and meaning, we choose to gather together and to experience joy and connection with one another. The first festival after sorrow becomes a ritual of healing and of renewal, a ritual through which communities process their grief and move forward into the future, a ritual that marks the transition from a period of acute crisis and shock to a period of recovery and rebuilding. Consider a specific and detailed and emotionally realistic example that illustrates these dynamics and these complexities. A small town in New England that experiences a devastating tragedy in the form of a mass shooting at a local school. A tragedy that kills 10 or 12 children and teachers. A tragedy that deeply devastates the entire community and that fundamentally disrupts the normal life of the town. Such a tragedy would tear apart the fabric of community life in profound ways. In the immediate aftermath of such a tragedy, the community would be in profound shock and disorientation and grief. Schools and businesses would close. People would wander the streets in a daze, unable to process what has happened. People would gather together in groups to share their shock and their grief. Counselors and mental health professionals and crisis workers would be brought in from other communities to help people process the trauma. The normal rhythms of community life would be completely disrupted. People would be unable to focus on their normal work and their normal concerns. All of the energy and attention of the community would be focused on processing the tragedy and beginning to support people who had been directly affected, the families of the victims, the survivors, the students and teachers at the school, the first responders who had to respond to the tragedy. Makeshift memorials would appear in public spaces, flowers and candles, and photographs of the dead placed in gathering places as ways of honoring the victims. People would gather at these memorials and would share their grief together. But eventually, after weeks or months, after the immediate shock has faded somewhat, after the funerals have been held and the dead have been buried, after the initial crisis period has passed and the community has begun to settle into the new reality of living after tragedy, the community would face a new set of questions. How long should the community remain in active mourning? When would it be appropriate to resume normal activities? When would it be appropriate to hold the community's seasonal festivals again? These questions would be discussed in community meetings and in conversations between friends and family members. There would not be easy agreement about the answers. Different people would have different perspectives based on their own experiences and their own values and their own religious or spiritual beliefs. Some community members would feel strongly that resuming celebrations too soon would be inappropriate and would show insufficient respect for the dead and insufficient acknowledgement of the ongoing grief and suffering of survivors. These community members would want the community to remain in a state of active mourning for an extended period, perhaps for many months or even for a year or more. They would feel that to resume festivals and celebrations while survivors are still grieving deeply and while the wounds of the tragedy are still fresh would be a betrayal of those who died, would seem to suggest that the community has already moved past the tragedy, when in fact the community is still grieving. Other community members would feel that the children and teachers who died would not want the community to remain in mourning indefinitely, that they would want the community to continue to live and to experience joy and to celebrate community and connection and to support one another. These community members would want to resume celebrations relatively quickly as a way of honoring the dead by continuing to live, and by affirming that the tragedy will not destroy the community's seek capacity for joy and for connection and for meaning-making. Community leaders would face the difficult task of finding a way to balance these competing needs and perspectives, of creating a path forward that honored both the grief and the need to continue living. They might consult with mental health professionals about appropriate timing. They might hold community forums where different perspectives could be shared and discussed. They might consult with religious leaders about how different faith traditions understand the relationship between mourning and celebration. They might decide that the first festival after the tragedy would be held several months after the shooting, giving people enough time to process their immediate grief while not allowing the grief to completely dominate the community's future. They might decide to hold a memorial service or a remembrance ceremony in the weeks before the first festival, a way of honoring the dead and of acknowledging the loss in a deliberate and intentional way before moving into celebration. The first festival after the tragedy would likely be different from previous festivals. It might include moments of silence or remembrance. It might include references to those who had died. It might be somewhat more subdued or reflective than previous festivals had been. But it would still include music and celebration and gathering together, a way of reclaiming joy and community identity in the face of loss. The emotional experience of the first festival after sorrow is typically quite complex and quite layered and quite difficult to describe or to capture because the emotions are so multifaceted. People experience multiple and sometimes conflicting emotions simultaneously. Sadness and grief and loss mixed with joy and celebration and gratitude for connection. Feelings of continuing pain mixed with feelings of hope and resilience. There is often a sense of guilt about experiencing joy, a feeling that experiencing happiness seems somehow disloyal to those who have died or to those who are still suffering most deeply. But there is also a sense of relief and of catharsis, a sense of release from the heaviness of acute grief that has been carried for weeks or months. The festival becomes a space where these complicated and contradictory emotions can coexist, where people can experience both grief and joy simultaneously, where the community can mark both what has been lost and what continues to exist and what continues to matter. A person might cry and laugh within the space of minutes. A person might feel profound sadness when thinking about a specific person who has died and profound joy when connecting with community members. The festival holds space for all of these emotions. The sensory and emotional intensity of the first festival after sorrow is often particularly acute and particularly memorable because of the layers of emotion that people bring to the experience. As people gather in the town square or in the streets, as they prepare for the festival to begin, there is often a sense of hesitation or uncertainty or even anxiety. People might wonder, is it okay to celebrate? Is it appropriate to feel happy and joyful given what has happened? Is it disrespectful to those who died? People might feel nervous about how they will react, worried that they will become too emotional or that they will feel too numb. But as the festival progresses, as music begins to play and people begin to move and to interact with one another, as the collective energy of the community builds, as people see others around them experiencing joy and connection, most people find that they are able to experience joy alongside their grief. They find that celebrating does not mean forgetting or betraying those who have died, but rather means affirming their commitment to continuing to live and to create meaning and beauty and community despite the losses they have experienced. They find that honoring the dead means not allowing the dead to destroy the capacity of the living to experience joy and connection and hope. They find that they can feel sad about who is not there and joyful about who is there. People experience the first festival after sorrow through all of their senses in ways that create powerful and lasting memories. They hear the music and the voices of people celebrating together, the sounds of children laughing and playing, the sounds of community members talking and greeting one another, the sounds of live music or recorded music, the sounds of people cheering or applauding. They see the decorations that have been put up, the lights and the colors, and the gathering of community members in public spaces, the faces of people they have known their whole lives, and the faces of people who have come from other communities to show solidarity. They smell the food that has been prepared and shared, whether that is hot dogs and hamburgers at an American festival or festival foods, specific to the particular community and its cultural traditions and its heritage. They experience the physical sensations of being close to other people, the warmth of standing shoulder to shoulder with others, the physical experience of moving and dancing, or walking through the festival, the sensation of being part of a crowd and part of something larger than themselves. They taste the food and the drinks. All of these sensory experiences become part of the memory of the event and contribute significantly to its meaning and its significance and its place in the community as collective memory. These sensory memories are often more powerful and more lasting than verbal memories. People might not remember exactly what was said or what was done, but they will remember how the festival felt, what the experience was like, the sensations and the emotions of being there. The first festival after sorrow often becomes one of the most remembered and most meaningful festivals in a community's history, precisely because of these intense sensory and emotional experiences, and because of the significance that the community attaches to the event. People remember the specific details of where they were and what they were doing and what they felt, remember whom they were with and how those people reacted. They remember particular moments, a song that was performed, a speech that was given, a time when they felt particularly moved or particularly connected to the community. They remember when they first saw people embracing, or when they first felt themselves beginning to smile again. The festival takes on a kind of mythical or legendary status in community memory. Years or decades later, people will still remember the first festival after the tragedy or recall the complex mixture of emotions they experienced, will understand that event as a turning point in the community's life, a moment when the community chose to continue and to heal and to move forward. The preparation for the first festival after sorrow often involves important and sometimes difficult conversations within the community about how to honor both grief and celebration, about how to create a festival that acknowledges loss and pain while also affirming life and community and hope for the future. Community members might form planning committees that include representatives from different parts of the community, people who are directly affected by the tragedy, people from the community's religious institutions, community artists and musicians, city officials and administrators, young people and elders. These committees would meet multiple times over weeks or months to plan and to discuss the festival. These committees would discuss whether to include specific memorials or remembrances in the festival program, whether to name the people who died, whether to have a moment of silence, whether to light candles for the dead, whether to plant trees or flowers in honor of the dead. They would discuss how to tone the festival, whether to keep it similar to previous years, or whether to adjust it to reflect the changed emotional landscape of the community. They would discuss whether survivors of the tragedy should participate in the festival, or whether they should have the option to observe from a distance if they choose whether participating in the festival might be re-traumatizing or whether it might be helpful and healing. They would discuss logistics, how to provide adequate facilities and accessibility, how to ensure security, how to manage crowds, how to ensure that the festival would be welcoming and safe for all community members. These conversations are important and meaningful because they help the community to work through their collective grief and to create a shared understanding of how to move forward together. They help different community members to understand each other's perspectives and concerns. They create a sense of shared ownership of the festival and of the process of healing. They help to ensure that the festival will reflect the community's values and will honor the dead in ways that feel appropriate and respectful to community members. They also help committee members themselves to process their own grief and to feel as though they are doing something constructive and meaningful in the wake of tragedy. Religious and spiritual traditions often play important roles in the first festival after sorrow. Many festivals have religious or spiritual significance, and religious leaders from the community, as various faith traditions, might offer prayers or blessings or spiritual guidance about how to think about celebrating after tragedy. Some traditions teach that celebrating after loss is a form of honoring the dead, that continuing to live and to experience. Joy is a way of affirming that the dead did not die in vain, and that their deaths do not negate the fundamental value and goodness of life. Some traditions might emphasize that experiencing joy after loss is a form of resistance to whatever forces or circumstances caused the tragedy, a refusal to allow tragedy to destroy the living. Other traditions might emphasize the importance of memorial and remembrance as part of the healing process, the idea that the community must acknowledge and honor loss before moving forward into celebration. Religious leaders might work together across faith boundaries to create moments of interfaith prayer or remembrance within the festival, moments that honor the spiritual and religious diversity of the community, and that create spaces where people of all faiths can gather together. The arts play important and often central roles in the first festival after sorrow. Music in particular becomes a powerful and even essential way for communities to express and to process grief and to celebrate resilience and connection. A community might commission new music for the first festival after sorrow, music that reflects the experience of loss and recovery and that honors the dead in musical form. Local composers might write pieces specifically for the festival. Musicians from the community might contribute their talents. They might perform traditional music that has special meaning in their community, or that is central to their community as cultural heritage and identity. They might invite performers and musicians from other communities to participate in the festival as a way of expressing solidarity and connection across community boundaries. Performing artists might be moved to tears while performing in a festival after tragedy, feeling the weight of meaning that their performance carries. Audiences might experience music as a way of processing and expressing emotions that are too complex or too painful to express in words. A song that had no particular significance before the tragedy might take on profound meaning in the context of the festival after sorrow. Visual artists might create installations or displays for the festival that honor the dead and that allow community members to engage with the experience of loss and recovery in creative ways. Painters might paint murals. Sculptors might create sculptures. Photographers might display photographs. These artworks become ways for the community to collectively process their experience and to create beauty from pain. Theater groups might perform pieces that address the tragedy or that explore themes of loss and resilience. Dance groups might perform dances that express the community's emotional journey. All of these artistic expressions help the community to transform their raw grief into something meaningful and beautiful and shareable. The creation of art becomes a way for people to process their emotions and to contribute to the healing of the community. The participation of children in the first festival after sorrow is often particularly poignant and particularly significant. Children who have experienced the tragedy directly, whether they were at the site of the tragedy or whether they lost a sibling or parent or friend, may find that participating in the festival helps them to process their grief and to begin to move forward to see that they can experience joy again, to feel reconnected to their community. Children who are not directly affected by the tragedy, but who are aware of what happened, may participate in the festival as a way of showing solidarity and support for their community. Very young children who may not fully understand what has happened might simply enjoy the festival as a celebration and might be shielded somewhat from the weight of grief that older children and adults are carrying. The presence of children in the festival affirms that life continues, that the community has a future, that despite the losses of the past, there are young people who will carry the community's story and its values and its ways of being forward into the future. Adults often find comfort and hope in seeing children participate in the festival and in gradually returning to the activities and the joy that are natural to childhood. The first festival after sorrow often becomes a moment when a community makes important choices about its identity and its values and its understanding of itself. The choices they make about how to conduct the festival, about how to balance grief and celebration, about how to remember the dead while continuing to live, about what to emphasize and what to downplay, reflect the community's deepest values and its understanding of what it means to be a community, what it means to support one another, what it means to honor the dead. A community that chooses to hold a joyful and exuberant festival after tragedy is making a statement about resilience and about the power of community, to heal and to recover, about the importance of continuing to create beauty and meaning even in the face of loss. A community that chooses to hold a more subdued or reflective festival is making a statement about the importance of honoring loss and about taking time to process grief, about maintaining a sense of seriousness and respect in the immediate aftermath of tragedy. Neither choice is inherently right or wrong. The right choice is the one that feels appropriate and true to the community's needs and values and circumstances, and the specific nature of the tragedy that the community has experienced. The impact of the first festival after sorrow on individual participants is often quite profound and quite lasting, and can mark a genuine turning point in their personal grieving process. For many people, participating in the festival becomes a moment they can point to and say, "This was when I began to heal. This was when I realized I could experience joy again. This was when I felt reconnected to my community." The experience of being part of a community gathering, of experiencing joy and connection, alongside others who are also grieving, of seeing that collective grief and collective joy can coexist, can be deeply healing and transformative in ways that individual or private grieving cannot be. People often report that participating in the festival helped them to move forward with their own grief, to recognize that they could experience joy again without betraying those who had died, to feel reconnected to their community and to the sense of shared identity and purpose that had been disrupted by the tragedy. For people who had felt isolated in their grief, the festival can create a sense of connection to others who are grieving, a recognition that they are not alone in their experience. And complicated and layered meanings than it does for others in the community. These individuals might feel conflicted about celebrating. They might feel that celebrating seems to betray the memory of their lost loved ones, or that celebrating is premature or inappropriate, that their continued grief should prevent them from participating in joy and celebration. But many people who have experienced such losses report that they find deep meaning in participating in the community gathering, that being part of the community as affirmation of life and continuity provides comfort and support and helps them to begin to heal. Some community members create personal rituals or practices during the festival as ways of honoring their specific losses while also participating in the community's celebration. They might light a candle for a lost loved one and hold that candle as they move through the festival. They might plant a tree or a flower in a memorial garden. They might play a song that was meaningful to the person who died. They might release balloons or doves with messages written on them. They might create a small altar or memorial within the festival space where people can come to remember specific people. They might wear clothing that belonged to the person who died or that has significance to the person who died. These personal rituals allow people to honor their specific grief while also being part of the larger community gathering, creating a way for personal and communal mourning to coexist. The first festival after sorrow often becomes a moment when communities experience increased empathy and increased compassion for one another, when the barriers that normally separate people are temporarily lowered or dissolved. People who might normally maintain distance from one another, who might normally focus on their individual lives and concerns and family circles, find themselves drawn together by the shared experience of grief and by the collective decision to celebrate and to affirm life. Barriers between people often break down. People from different social classes or different ethnic backgrounds or different religious traditions who might normally have limited interaction with one another find themselves standing together, grieving together, celebrating together. People who have experienced losses of their own in the past find themselves able to support people who have experienced the recent tragedy, finding that sharing their own experience of loss can help others to feel less alone. Strangers find themselves embracing one another, finding unexpected connection and understanding. The festival becomes a space where the normal hierarchies and divisions of ordinary community life are temporarily suspended and where people experience genuine connection and solidarity in the recognition that they are all fundamentally part of the same community, subject to the same vulnerability and the same capacity for suffering and the same capacity for resilience and healing. The role of municipal authorities and community leaders in organizing and facilitating the first festival after sorrow is complex and important and carries significant responsibility. These leaders must balance and honor the needs and perspectives of many different community members, must be responsive to different perspectives and concerns, and must try to include diverse voices in the planning process. They must make decisions about whether to alter the festival from previous years, and in what ways, whether to add new elements that honor the dead or whether to keep the festival similar to how it has been in previous years. They must decide how to include memorials and remembrances without allowing those to overwhelm or to completely dominate or to detract from the festival's celebratory aspects and its affirming aspects. They must try to create a festival that feels appropriate to the community's current emotional and psychological state, while also affirming the community's commitment to continuing to live and to celebrate and to create meaning and beauty. They must try to create a festival that is inclusive and that honors the experiences and the perspectives of all community members, including those who are grieving most deeply. They must also consider practical matters, how to provide security and safety for the festival, how to provide adequate facilities and restrooms and food and water, how to manage traffic and crowds, how to ensure that the festival is accessible to people with disabilities, how to provide quiet spaces for people who need to step away from the main festival activities. The communication and outreach that community leaders do in the lead-up to the first festival after sorrow is important in helping community members to understand what the festival will be like and in helping them to feel prepared and supported in participating. Leaders might hold community meetings to discuss plans for the festival, inviting people to share their thoughts and concerns. They might send out newsletters or emails, or use social media to communicate information about the festival, providing details about timing and location and activities. They might work with religious leaders and mental health professionals to help community members understand how participating in the festival might be healing and how they can support one another during the festival. They might provide information about support services and mental health resources for community members who might find the festival triggering or who might need support in processing their grief. They might create materials that explain the thinking behind the festival, that help people to understand how the community is approaching the balance between mourning and celebration. The media coverage of the first festival after sorrow is also significant in ways that are both positive and potentially problematic. Media coverage helps to spread the story of the community's resilience and recovery to a wider audience. Media coverage can amplify the meaning of the community's decision to hold the festival, can inspire other communities who have experienced similar tragedies, can draw attention to the community's needs and to resources that might be available to support recovery and healing. Media coverage can help the community to process their experience and can provide validation and acknowledgement of the community's pain and the community's resilience. However, media coverage can also be intrusive and can sometimes distort or sensationalize the community's experience. Journalists and photographers might focus on dramatic or emotional moments in ways that do not accurately reflect the full experience of the festival. Media coverage can sometimes prioritize entertainment value over respect for the community's experience. Reporters might descend on the community in large numbers, making it difficult for community members to have private or intimate experiences during the festival. Community leaders must often work to manage media coverage, to set boundaries, to establish media zones where reporters can observe but not disturb the festival experience, to ensure that the community's experience is treated with respect and dignity. Some communities have chosen to limit media coverage significantly, asking reporters to respect the community's space and allowing only essential coverage. The first festival after sorrow often attracts visitors from other communities, people who have heard about the festival and who want to participate in or to witness the community's celebration and recovery. These outside visitors might come because they have experienced similar tragedies in their own communities and want to show solidarity. They might come because they have friends or family members in the affected community. They might come simply because they have heard about the festival and are moved by the story of community resilience. These outside visitors become participants in the festival and in the community's healing process. The presence of outside visitors can enhance the festival by bringing new energy and new perspectives and can demonstrate to the community that they are not alone in their experience, that other communities recognize and honor their resilience and their commitment to continuing to live and to celebrate. Outside visitors can provide perspective and can affirm that the community's response is meaningful, not just to themselves, but to a broader circle of people who have heard about what they are doing. Some visitors come with gifts or donations or offers of support. Some visitors come simply to stand with the community in solidarity. The months and years following the first festival after sorrow see communities gradually returning to normal patterns of celebration and community life, though they are changed by what has happened. The experience of the first festival after sorrow often becomes embedded in how the community understands itself and how the community conducts future festivals. Anniversaries of the tragedy become times when memorials are held in conjunction with the festival. The memorial and the celebration become intertwined. Names of those who died might be read aloud every year at the festival. Trees or flowers planted in their memory might be tended and cared for. The festival becomes a way for the community to annually process and mark the tragedy that has occurred. Over time, as years pass and as the immediate pain of the tragedy fades somewhat, the festival might return to being more of a celebration and less of a memorial, though the memorial aspects are never entirely forgotten. But for the people who lived through the tragedy, who participated in that first festival after sorrow, that festival will always carry special meaning and special significance. The decision to hold the first festival after sorrow ultimately reflects fundamental choices that communities make about how to respond to tragedy and loss. Communities that choose to hold the festival are making a statement about their values and their understanding of what it means to be a community. They are saying that they will not allow tragedy to destroy their capacity for joy. They are saying that they understand honoring the dead as involving not just grief, but also the continuation of life and the creation of meaning and beauty. They are saying that the living have a responsibility to continue living well, to create community, to experience joy and connection. They are saying that they believe in the possibility of healing and recovery and moving forward. The first festival after sorrow is also an expression of faith that time will heal, faith that communities can recover, faith that joy and celebration are possible even after devastating loss. It is an expression of hope that the future will be better than the present, hope that the community will survive and will thrive, hope that meaning can be created even after loss. It is an expression of love for those who have died, love for those who have survived, love for the community itself, and for the values that hold the community together. Ultimately, the first festival after sorrow represents something profound about human resilience and human nature, and the human capacity to find meaning and to create beauty in the face of loss and tragedy. Despite the undeniable capacity of human nature and human society for tragedy and for terrible suffering, humans continue to gather together and to create beauty and joy and celebration. Despite profound losses, communities continue to find reasons to celebrate and to affirm life. The decision to hold the first festival after sorrow is an affirmation of faith in the future and an affirmation of the values of community, connection, mutual support, and the continued creation of meaning and beauty in human life. It is an affirmation that grief and joy can coexist, that honoring the dead and continuing to live are not contradictory, but are part of the same process of moving forward. It is an affirmation that life is worth living, that community is worth building, that beauty and meaning are worth creating even in the face of loss and tragedy. The rituals and practices that communities develop around the first festival after sorrow often become embedded in the community as identity and become repeated and honored in subsequent years. Anniversaries of the first festival after sorrow often become important occasions themselves, moments when the community gathers to remember not just the original tragedy, but also the community as response to the tragedy and the community as commitment to recovery and resilience. The first festival after sorrow becomes a story that the community tells about itself, a story that demonstrates the community's capacity to endure and to heal and to create beauty in the face of loss. This story becomes part of the community's identity and becomes part of how the community defines itself. When new members move into the community, they learn about the tragedy and about how the community responded. When young people grow up in the community, they learn about the festival and about what it meant to their community. The story of the first festival after sorrow becomes part of how the community understands itself and how the community transmits values to future generations. The first festival after sorrow matters profoundly because it marks a turning point in how a community understands itself and its future. It is a moment when the community makes a collective choice to continue to live, to celebrate despite loss and suffering. It is a moment when grief and joy coexist explicitly and publicly, when the community honors the dead by continuing to live, and by continuing to create beauty and meaning and celebration. It is a moment of profound collective courage and resilience, a moment that will be remembered for years and decades to come, a moment that demonstrates the remarkable and seemingly unlimited capacity of human communities to survive tragedy and to create new meaning in the aftermath of sorrow. In choosing to hold the first festival after sorrow, communities affirm that human life continues. That meaning can be created even after loss, that joy and celebration are not luxuries that communities can afford only in times of peace and prosperity, but are essential parts of what it means to be human and to be part of a community. The first festival after sorrow is an act of defiance and an act of faith defiance in the face of whatever forces or circumstances caused the tragedy. Defiance expressed through the assertion that the community will not be destroyed or diminished, and faith that the community will survive and will heal and will continue to create beauty and meaning and connection in the future. It is a moment when the community says to those who have died, "We will remember you, and we will honor your memory by continuing to live fully and to create community and to experience joy." It is a moment when the community says to those who are still grieving, "You are not alone. We are here with you, and we believe that healing is possible." It is a moment when the community says to itself and to the world, "We are resilient. We will endure. We will continue to be a community. We will continue to celebrate and to create meaning despite everything that has happened